Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Illinois Disciples Foundation. I'm Kurt Hilgendorf, and I will be your MC for the evening. You're all here for racism in sports and the media, why Chief Illini must go, a talk by Clyde Bellecourt. This talk is sponsored by the Progressive Resource Action Cooperative, a multi-issue, multi-tactical activist organization committed to peace with social justice. We are students, faculty, and community residents working to promote human rights, democracy, and self-determination for all people. The PRC is a program of the Illinois Disciples Foundation, a Peace with Justice campus ministry. I'd like to talk briefly about today's action and some of the upcoming events. As many of you may know, the PRC, along with students, faculty, and community members, were out to protest the university's racist mascot today. The demonstration started outside with Clyde speaking for about 15 minutes. We then led some chants and marched into the South Lounge of the Illini Union, where a People's Board of Conscience was convened. The board passed a resolution against the chief, affirming the value of campus cultural houses and for a union recognizing the Graduate Employees Organization, and the resolution reads as follows. Whereas the University of Illinois upholds institutional racism through the maintenance of its mascot, Chief Illini. Where the University of Illinois refuses to recognize the right of its graduate students to organize a union. Whereas the University of Illinois does not properly meet the needs of students of color by adequately maintaining and establishing cultural houses. Whereas the University of Illinois Board of Trustees has failed in its moral and political obligation to reflect the interests of its students and community members by acting on the above issues. Be it resolved that a People's Board of Conscience has been convened to properly represent student and community member interests by continuing the struggle for social justice through calling for the elimination of Chief Illini, supporting the Graduate Employees Organization's right to organize, and recognizing the need for cultural houses. And today's rally was a great success. We had almost no problems whatsoever. About 250 people showed up outside and stayed, and about almost 150 came back in and protested with us. So yeah, it was a good day for everybody involved. PRC is sponsoring two upcoming events. Saturday, April 24th, in a couple of days, from 6:30 to 9 here in Weisgarber Lounge. The PRC will be co-sponsoring a talk by Jose Lopez, director of the Puerto Rican Cultural Center in Chicago. Lopez will speak about Puerto Rican independence and about issues facing the Puerto Rican community in the United States. Proceeds from the event will go to the Family and Defense Committee of Jose Solis Jordan, a recently incarcerated Puerto Rican political prisoner. Other co-sponsors of the event include the Illinois Disciples Foundation, Socialist Forum, La Casa Cultural Latina, and the Puerto Rican Student Association and Vietnam Veterans Against the War CU chapter. And on May 22nd, VVAW and the PRC will be having a counter-recruitment fair here again in Weisgarber from 2 to 5. And the purpose of the fair is to let prospective members of the military know exactly what they're getting into. And now I would like to introduce our featured speaker. Clyde Bellecourt is founder and director of the American Indian Movement. He was a major figure in the occupation of Wounded Knee in 1973 and played a founding role in the International Indian Treaty Council. He is also directing the Peacemaker Center for Indian Youth and the AIM Patrol, which provides the security for Minneapolis Indian community. He's organizer in the National Coalition on Racism in Sports and Media. And there will be a question and answer session to follow. So now, a round of applause for Clyde Bellecourt.
First of all, I want to thank the Progressive Student Resource Action Cooperative for the invitation and bringing me here. I think it's my fourth or fifth trip here to Champaign. I came here shortly after they call it the occupation of Wounded Knee, but we call it the liberation of Wounded Knee, and we had quite an audience back in those days. Ojun Nigan Nawewidan Indigenous Cause, Osishak Dodain, Anishinaabe. I bring you greetings from the great Anishinaabe nation. My name is Nigan Nawewidan. In the translation in the Anishinaabe language of my people is thunder before the storm. And that's the way it was at one time in our history. When a little baby was born into this realm, this world, we came in with a spirit name that was given to us by the Creator. However, that was extinguished in 1890 when the federal government outlawed Indian culture, or they call it religion, of the Indian people here in America. A lot of people are shocked when I tell them that, but that's the truth. They outlawed Indian language, Indian culture, Indian tradition, the sun dance, the powwows, the sacred drums, the flutes, and all the various societies that existed across America. And in a cooperative effort with the churches and education, they came in and stripped us of our language and our culture and our tradition. Our people were actually punished if they got caught speaking Indian. And before I go any further, I was given some tobacco here today. In the Anishinaabe way of life, in the Anishinaabe, wherever we gather, whenever we speak, in any formal gathering, whether it be a tribal council, a presentation that is being made here tonight, we always ask the Creator for His blessing. We ask the Creator to watch over to us. We ask the Creator to help us and to come together as one, so that we might hold hands and walk as one again. So with that in mind, I'd like to offer this tobacco that was given to me today to the four directions of the universe and to our sacred Mother Earth, who provides everything that we have, and to Mishomish Gitchimai too, their grandfather, the Great Spirit, to be with us at this time. The Indian way, the Creator arises in the east every morning in the Anishinaabe way. He brings life and warmth and growth and everything in his path as he travels in the western direction. So with that in mind, I'd like to offer this tobacco. Too, Grandfather, Great Spirit, you will arise in the east every morning in warmth and life. Give life to everything in your path. Grandfather, we're going to thank you. Ask for your direction tonight. Ask for your permission, Grandfather, to say the things that have to be said. Ask for your blessing for this gathering that is taking place. And to the south, Mishomish Gitchimai, too, Grandfather, Great Spirit, to all the tribes and nations to the south of us, where the warm winds come that bring back the bird life, those that fly above. It brings the ones that crawl within the earth, Grandfather, back with warmth. We ask you to be with us tonight, Grandfather. Bless this gathering, bless these people. And to the west, the Mishomish Gitchimai too, Grandfather, where we go to the spirit world upon our life's journey here on earth. We ask for blessing, Grandfather, for all the tribes and nations to the west of us, Mishomish Gitchimai too. They might join us tonight in this sacred gathering. And O Mishomish Gitchimai too, Grandfather, Great Spirit, we offer this tobacco to the north, where the great white bear dwells, where our medicine comes from, that heals our sicknesses and our wounds, gives life to those that are in need. We ask you to be with us, Grandfather. We pray for all the tribes and nations to the north of us. Grandfather, Great Spirit, we offer this tobacco to our sacred Mother Earth, provides the food that we eat, provides all the medicines that heals our wounds and our sicknesses. And Mother, we ask nothing for ourselves because you have given us everything that we need. We ask for your blessings, your contributions to those that are in need. No more should get you mine too, Grandfather. Great Spirit, I offer this tobacco tonight for those that are suffering throughout the world, the families that are grieving today, Grandfather, in Colorado, that lost their loved ones and their children. Grandfather, I ask you to give them strength. To those then, Grandfather, that are being removed from their homelands, Grandfather, and their homes being burnt down and all their worldly possessions, Grandfather, we ask you to have pity on them, Grandfather, and give them the strength so they can continue their families and their life. This sacred tobacco, Michonne, would get you mine too, grandfather, that you have given us. I ask for a blessing tonight. I ask you to open the minds of everyone, grandfather, that is gathered here in this room, that they might be able to understand and do something about what is hurting the people at this time. Just take the tobacco, Michonne, would get you mine too, and offer me which. Thank you. I want to say a few more words about the American Indian movement before I get started. Some of the things that weren't mentioned is we have created one of the first alternative Indian education programs in the nation. Part of the Earth Survival School is 27 years old this year. We have graduated more students from Heart of the Earth Survival School in the whole Minneapolis public school system, the parochial school system of Minneapolis in the state of Minnesota. And I'm talking about a community where over 30,000 Indian people live today, where the student population in the public school is 7,000. We have never in our history had more than 250 students from K through 12 going to school. But with the introduction of Indian culture and tradition, spirituality and language, by reinforcing our young people and making them feel good about themselves, we have been successful in graduating more students from our school and the whole public school system. Another thing that we have done is we have created a legal rights center. We didn't just talk about the dual system of justice and how it affects Indian and poor people. We joined hands with the black community in Minneapolis and created what's called the Legal Rights Center. To date, the Legal Rights Center has represented over 32,000 indigenous clients over its 30-year history. And today we serve not only the Native American, the black, but the Hispanic, the Southeast Asian, now the Somalian communities that are moving into the Twin City area of Minneapolis and St. Paul. In 1979, we created what is called the American Indian Opportunities Industrialization Center, which is a black leader named Leon H. Sullivan in Philadelphia 34 years ago. Dr. Sullivan took an old abandoned jailhouse from the city officials in Philadelphia and told them that if he gave him this old abandoned jailhouse and some equipment, he would take these young blacks off the street and he would train them and he would put them to work. And when I met him in 1979, he had 182 job training programs going not only across America, but throughout the world. He had trained over 1.5 million poor people. And we created the Indian arm of that organization. To date, we have trained over 19,000 Indian people in the city of Minneapolis. And 14,000 of them were formerly recipients of welfare, third, fourth generation welfare recipients. We have one of the highest retention rates in the nation today. We have taken virtually thousands of people off from welfare rolls and put them on payrolls. So the American Indian movement, as is looked at today as a militant, radical organization, has created those institutions and programs when the system itself would not change to serve our people. And the success of these programs is based on identification, to bringing back our culture and our traditions, to developing a spiritual base for where our people can work from, where our young people can feel good about themselves. We have been having these tremendous successes. A few words about my mother and my father. Because when I talk about my mother and my father, I'm talking about every Indian in America. A lot of times people say, oh, that Clyde Bellecourt, he's a militant, he's a radical. He took over the Bureau of Indian Affairs in 1972, caused $5 million damage. He went to Wounded Knee in 1973, and he held out the United States government and all its military forces, the FBI, the Justice Department, tribal police, BIP, goon squads, state sheriff's departments, state patrolmen, for 71 days. He's a radical. And they say he doesn't speak for us. But I say to them that we speak on behalf of all Indian people in America, because we speak about our future. We speak about putting something that our children can cling to, that our children can find their own survival in. So when I talk about my mother and I talk about my father, I'm talking about every Indian in America. My mother was a young girl, 10 years old, like hundreds and thousands. Every one of our aunties, every one of our mothers, our grandmothers went through what I'm telling you right now today. She was swept off the streets of White Earth in the Chippewa Reservation in northern Minnesota, herded into wagons and taken to a boarding school. She was not allowed to leave that boarding school for 9 solid years. She done more time in that boarding school than most rapists and murderers do today in penitentiaries and prisons across this country. And I didn't learn until many years later what they really did to her in that boarding school system. I used to wonder why my mother would limp. She could hardly walk. Her legs would swell up on her every time the weather changed. We'd say, Mom, what's wrong with your legs? And she would shush us up, tell us not to ask so many questions. Just go to school, learn to speak English, pay attention to your teachers, your math, learn all about the history. Said, who knows, someday you might be President of the United States. We've all had our mothers tell us that at one time or another. When the old people, late at night, I can remember when she thought we were all in bed sleeping, twin sisters and 4 other brothers. We'd be upstairs, and about 11 o'clock at night, I could hear the knocks on the door. Mrs. Big Bear, Little Wolf, Old Lady Smith, they would come to the house, and my mom would open the door and say, oh, bonjour, Nietzsche. They'd speak the Indian language. And I'd later at night wonder, why don't they teach me these things? I could hear them laughing so hard, so they'd be crying. Sometimes they'd fall right off the chair, they'd be having such a good time. Then the alarm clock would go off in the morning. It was time to get up and go to school. Everything was in English again. Mom! He used to ask her, Mom, how come you don't teach us to speak that beautiful language? Well, what are you talking about? I heard you last night talking, old lady. Mrs. Bear, Little Wolf, Mrs. Smith. Oh, forget about that. That's the past. Just go to school. Learn to speak good English language. Learn the history. Pay attention to your teachers. Someday you might be president of the United States. My father, he was taken out of the school too in Carlisle during the First World War. To get away from that military school, he enlisted. He didn't have to go in the service. Over 50,000 Native people fought in the First World War. Not one single one of them could be drafted because there were wards of the federal government. Through treaties, they said they would lay down their arms and never again would they ever take them up against any nation. We were exempt from the armed force, but my father was a warrior. He comes from a line of chiefs, great chiefs. White Crane, one of the principal chiefs of our nation, that's my grandfather. And my father, with 50,000 other Indian people, they enlisted in that First World War. And he went across those waters. And he fought. He was one of the lucky ones. He came home with 17 machine gun wounds, gassed and bloated. Just 16 months later. Spent 9 months in the hospital before they brought him home. He said when they wiped out their battalion, he covered himself with dead bodies. And they thought he was dead too. And they found him later. And I mention this because a lot of times they say, oh, the American Indian Movement, they're not a very patriotic organization. They're always attacking the federal government. Well, Indian people have fought, per capita basis, more Indian people fought in the First and Second World War and the Korean War in Vietnam than any other ethnic group in America. They're very patriotic people. Several years after the formation of the American Indian movement, my mom, she developed heart problems because of me. I was being arrested, I was being jailed, I went to Wounded Knee, took over the BIA. I was always out marching against the police, trying to do something about the racism and the bigotry and the hatred, the dual system of justice. I even got shot right below the heart by an FBI agent, assassination attempt. Finally, my mom, she started seeing all the good things that were happening. She saw the language coming back, the culture coming back, the schools, the health programs, the job training, powwows, the drum, the ceremonies. Little girls dancing again. She felt good. One night she sat me down and she told me her story. All your life you've been asking me about my legs, why my knees swell up and why I can hardly walk. And I'm going to tell you why. I never gave up my Indian language. I still speak it today, she told me. I still speak it today. But when I was a little girl, she said they would keep me after school at night when all the children were out running and having a good time and recess, that myself and hundreds of other Indian girls and boys would be scrubbing the floor with a toothbrush. On our hands and knees, they'd give us a little bar of soap, a toothbrush, and a pail of water. And we scrubbed floors all evening and all weekend. So toward the end, she said they tied sacks of marbles on my knees and made me scrub floors. And that crippled me the rest of my life. When my mother finally passed away and they had her hooked up to a machine, brain dead. And I had to go in and make a decision whether to turn off the machine. I knew that if my mother was alive, she'd have never allowed me to even put her into that position. She hated hospitals. Any sickness or any illness she had, she dealt with it herself. And so I took this elderly woman, this elderly lady with me, and went down. Because she could speak her Indian language and understand, I wanted her to be with me. And right when I got ready to pull the plug, I could hear my mother singing, started to sing. Supposed to be brain dead now. I asked this Mrs. Smith, I said, what's she talking about? I got way down by it. Listen. And she started smiling at me. And she said, your mother is singing about White Earth. That's where I'm from. She's singing about the clear blue water and the white sandy beaches of over 400 lakes that exist on my reservation today. She's singing about the white pine and all the beautiful trees. She's singing about the birch bark trees, the white birch bark trees. And she was going home. So even to her dying day, my mother still spoke the language. I've never ever forgotten that story. And I know that story justified everything that we have ever done in the history of the movement to try to correct the wrongs and make a better life for our people. I'm one of the founders of the American Indian movement. It was founded in July of 1968 in the city of Minneapolis, when we felt that little of nothing was being done to upgrade the conditions that Indian people are forced to live under right here in their own homeland. It came at a time when virtually nothing was being taught in the public and parochial school systems of America about Indian culture, Indian history, Indian tradition. Nothing is ever said about the contributions that Indian people made to modern day society. 70% of the food that you consume today was contributed by Indian people. Medical science and doctors have said they haven't come up with a medicine yet that Indian people didn't have used in practice. As I'm standing here talking today, there's a major archaeological digging that's been going on for over 27 years. Mountains in Guatemala. They discovered a city down there where over 50 1,000 Indian people lived in a modern metropolis 2,000 years before the Spaniards got there. They're finding pyramids down there that are 3 times larger than the pyramids they find along the Nile, built 200 years before the great Roman Empire. They're finding mummified bodies down there today. They don't talk about it, they don't put it on the news because they don't want the world to know the truth, how civilized we really were. They're looking at these mummified bodies in the skull and they're finding little pinholes in the skull. And now they're saying that Indian people were practicing brain surgery successfully while the Spaniards were still living in caves over in Europe. That's how modern this civilization was at one time. Nothing is ever written about, nothing is ever said about that in the history books. And that's kind of where we're at today. That's why we have this Chief Lenawik. Ill Lenawik. Chief Ill Lenawik. That's what it is. Sick. Trot around a floor during a basketball game. Almost a chorus line dance like the Radio City Rockette. Fold his arms and everybody cheer and clap. Praise him. Chief. He's not a chief. He's not even near what a chief really was and is today. Chiefs had to do a lot of things to gain that respect. He didn't go to an audition. He didn't go to an audition and dance around the ring in a circle and everybody bestowed a chieftainship on him. It didn't happen like that. It started all the way when they were a little boy. The women would watch him as he grew, as he developed into a leader. It was the women that selected our chiefs. It was the women that decided who the chief was going to be. If they didn't like what he was doing, they would dehorn him too. They would take that leadership away. So it took years and years. He didn't go to an audition here in an auditorium somewhere in Champaign and dance around with a tom-tom, slapping himself in the mouth and making some ridiculous sound they call a war whoop, choreographed, to make a chief out of him. See how silly, see how sick our community has become today? Because today, believe it or not, America is totally scholastically retarded when it comes to Indian culture, Indian tradition, Indian history, Indian spirituality. They know nothing. They have this ingrained John Wayne frontier mentality about Indian people and what we're all about. So all they know is what they see on television, in the movie industry. All they know about us today. American Indian movement was formed because we felt that our community was totally spiritually bankrupt in 1968. We didn't go to church, many of us, because we knew what the church had done, the conspiracy that they've been involved in for over 100 years to strip us of our language, our culture, and our tradition. But we didn't smoke the pipe either. We didn't go to sun dances. We didn't go into the sacred lodge to be purified. We didn't speak our language. We had no spiritual base, no traditional spiritual base to grow from. And that is why this movement formed. It wasn't until 1978 when the American Indian movement walked all the way from San Francisco to Washington, D.C., where we were successful in forcing this government to pass what's called the American Freedom Act. In 1978, they finally allowed Indian people, if they wanted to, publicly pray, to sing, and to dance, to be Indian again. When the American Indian movement formed in 1968, the very first thing that we did was we built a drum. because we knew that the drum was the very center of the universe, whether it was here in Illinois, on the White Chippewa Reservation, or down in Gallup, New Mexico. Whenever they sat that drum out, that was the center of their nation, the center of their learning. Everything was taught, and everything vibrated out from that drum, whether it be a water drum, a big drum, or the traditional drums that are used today. We started building sweat lodges. We started dancing in the sacred sun dance again. In 1972, we went out and we said, we're going to dance the sun dance. Oh, you better, they're going to put you in jail for it. Put us in jail for praying? Hey, wait a minute now. My understanding is when they came across in that boat, they were seeking religious freedom. That's why they came here. My understanding, what little history I know, when they came here, they were seeking religious freedom. Everything that they got, everything was given to them by the Indian people. We used to be one of the greatest welfare agencies in the world at one time. The greatest, everything. They didn't know how to insulate their clothing. You know, they'd have the fur outside instead of inside. We told them, turn it around. Put the fur inside, the skin outside, it'd be warmer. Showed them how to build their home, showed them what berries, what food to eat. They thought tomatoes were poisonous at one time. The Indian people showed them, they had to publicly take them into a big stadium and eat tomatoes in front of them. Now everybody in the world eats tomatoes. When they were sick, they weren't going to survive that first winter when the pilgrims got here. It was the Indian people that came out and fed them. Indian people came out and doctored them. That's why they had Thanksgiving. It wasn't just to thank God for making it through that first fall, that first gardening, that first winter. It was thank the Indian people. And look how they twisted that around. But the only time they ever think about us is during Thanksgiving or Columbus Day. Columbus Day. A pirate, 18,000 miles off his course, lost, floundering in the high seas. Stumbled upon us here, thought he was landing somewhere in the Indies, you know, call us Indians. We're not Indians. I'm the Anishinaabe, the Dakota, the Dene, the original people of the Western Hemisphere. But we began to use that word today. An elderly woman told us when we formed the American Indian Movement, we didn't call ourselves the American Indian Movement. We called ourselves, we're just a little small coalition of Indian Americans that are trying to change things for our people in Minneapolis. Of course, we had to change that acronym real fast. It was CIA, Concerned Indian American. And we asked the community, what's the name? What do you think about this new organization? What do you want to call us? There's two elderly women that came, told us, why don't you call yourself AIM? I said, AIM? Yeah, you're aiming to take on the dual system of justice. You're aiming to do something about education. You're aiming to do something about jobs and employment. You're aiming to deal with racism, the churches. What's it mean? American Indian Movement. But we don't want to be called Indians. We don't want to use that term anymore. But listen here. This elderly woman said, Indian is the name that they use to put us down to where we're at today. And Indian is what we use to gain our freedom. That's how these things happen. That's how these things happen. And we knew that we were small in numbers, that we had to stand out in the streets. They call it confrontation politics, and that's what it is. Let them know what is wrong and demand that change, and it caught on like wildfire. Several years later, we had the Trail of Tears, the Trail of Broken Treaties was coming through Oklahoma, and there was a spiritual leader there, Muskogee Creek. His name was Philip Deere. Said he was digging ditches, cleaning out rocks in his ditch, and all of a sudden, he said, I thought I heard Indians singing. And I just went back and went to work, and I could hear that singing again, getting closer. The Muskogee Creek were removed from the Georgian states for 150 years ago. They were taken out of 5 civilized tribes and they were marched across into Oklahoma on the Trail of Tears. A lot of historians today fail to neglect that there are a lot of black people who are also on that Trail of Tears. We don't even talk about it hardly ever in Black history, the Black History Month. The blacks that were running away from the slave owners, the only place they had to seek refuge was among the Cherokee, the Chickasaw, the Choctaw, the Seminoles. The Seminole Nation, they had a tribe called the Black Miccosukee. They were warriors. When the Trail of Tears came along, they marched them into Oklahoma. They had to go with the Indian people. And when they got to Oklahoma, they reestablished their nation and their government. And to date, the Seminole Nation in Oklahoma has 2 black representatives that sit on their tribal council, the Black Miccosukee. We knew that history. And Philip Deere's band was one of them, Muskogee Creek. When he got into Oklahoma, he reestablished his longhouse and his sweat lodge. He continued his language and his stories and everything, and kept everything intact. Because he was told that, he said during the 5th generation after what they considered their conquest, the treaty-making time when they were removal, that during the 5th generation, his people were told that the drum would be heard again and little fires would burn again. Here he is digging his ditch in early 70s, 1972. And he hears this sound coming out of the west. And he looked and he see the dust appearing on the road miles and miles away. He went back to work again. All of a sudden again in that drum. And he looked and he could see this caravan coming. He closed his eyes. He thought about what his grandfathers told him. They would come and they would be dressed in red. They'd be growing their hair back again. They'd be carrying a drum with them and they would be singing. And as it got closer to him, it turned out to be the American Indian movement. He said his wheelbarrow is still laying in the ditch today in the shovel. And he joined it because he knew it was time. There was a fulfillment of prophecy that this was to come about. He said when little of nothing was left, when we no longer spoke our language and knew anything about our culture, when we were nearly diseased and wiped out by smallpox and diphtheria and diseases, placed on a little reservation, fenced in, starving in these little houses, that this movement would be heard again. And as I've traveled throughout the 6 Nations Confederacy, and traveled down in Pueblo and Hopi, Navajo country, and all the way up into the Northwest Territory, and talked to elders, I found out that all of our prophecies are the same. There was a time in history when this was to evolve again. And they talked about how this nation that surrounded us today would condemn us and put us down and try to put a stop to this movement that was taking place. Because we knew when we formed in 1968 that we as Indian people still control 70% of all the energy resources left in America. We knew that 90% of all the fresh water left in America comes from this northern watershed, Michigan and Minnesota and Wisconsin. 90% of all the fresh water. And we knew that if we didn't stand up and protect those resources, we would surely perish as a people. And elders all over this nation, all the way up into Canada, joined and became part of this movement. That's why they call us radicals and militants and communists, everything they can think of to put us down and stop it. There's no way. There's no way that it can be stopped. Long after I'm gone from the face of the earth, our children will still be here, because that rebirth is here today. We went to Wounded Knee in 1940 because we wanted to make a political statement. We went to Wounded Knee because of the suffering, the pain. you went to Wounded Knee in the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation in 1972, 71, 72, and 73, you'd believe you were somewhere in South Africa. You'd believe that you were in El Salvador. You'd believe that you were somewhere in Guatemala, where roving goon squads and police squads would come by and terrorize the people, kill and rape the women, children, burn down homes, shoot your cattle. That was going on in Pine Ridge. There's over 200 unsolved murders on the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation and their surrounding little border towns when the American Indian movement finally went there under the request of the women of that reservation. They already went to the United States Civil Rights Division, the Justice Department, the United States Attorney, their senators and congressmen. They went to the governor, they went to the Bureau of Indian Affairs, the tribal police. Nobody would help them. They finally called the court of last resort, the American Indian Movement. We responded. We went there. It's a little ragtag organization. A few deer rifles, 22s, no automatic weapons. We went there to make a stand. It's going to be a very peaceful stand to begin with. Very peaceful. We chose Wounded Knee. We didn't go into the Occupy or Bureau. We already did all those things. We didn't go to surround the police department, demand relief and change. We already did those things. We're going to take land that was being exploited, being occupied, and being exploited, a sacred area where in 1890 over 300 women and children were murdered there by the 7th Cavalry. There was a book out called Burying My Heart at Wounded Knee. It was on the bestseller list. We knew that America and the world knew a little bit about Indian people. This is where we should make our stand. We sent an advanced group in there. Tell the 54 families that live there not to be afraid. It's going to be a very peaceful. We have to call attention to what has happened to Indian people, or we will surely perish as a people. So we went in there real nice and quietly, notified that there were 7 churches in that little community. Notified the ministers, everyone, the traders we were coming. Put up roadblocks when we all got all our people in there. The very next morning, right now they're talking about taking military forces and ground troops into Yugoslavia. So it's going to take them, I mean they've been at it a month now, bombing them. It's going to take them at least another month to get their ground forces in there, right? That's what they're saying. Next morning I was awakened. The basement of the Sacred Heart Church. They said, come on, we got to show you something. And I went out and they gave me binoculars and I thought, wow. Looking around, there was 24 armored personnel carriers surrounding us. That means that they had the military there already for over a month. We had evidence came out during the Wounded Knee trials where farmers and the whole ranchers in the area were hiding these tanks and all this armament in their barns, knowing that we were going to make some kind of a statement to the world. It's the first time in the criminal history of this government that occupies our land that they used all branches of the military without congressional approval or presidential approval. They did it under J. Edgar Hoover's master plan. You guys all know who J. Edgar Hoover is, huh? He used to sit around at night, he'd go home and he'd put on his pantyhose and he'd sit on his little stool and he had a big bulldog over here in the corner and he would design plans of he was going to destroy the Black Panthers, or he was going to destroy Martin Luther King, he's going to destroy Malcolm X, he's going to destroy the Weather Underground, he's going to destroy the National Organization of Women, he was going to go after organized labor. And oh yes, on that list, he had the American Indian Movement. Just 4 years after we formed, just 4 years after we formed, we were number 2 on his hit list, next to the black nationalists and a movement that had to be destroyed. We became a national threat to the stability of the United States government in only 3 years, because we were going to protect our land, our uranium, and our gold, and our coal, and our oil, and our water. We It became a national threat because we brought the treaty issue back to the forefront. And that's what we stood on in our movement. So J. Edgar Hoover, without congressional approval, without presidential support, formed a program called Operation COINTEL. It's the first time in history that the FBI joined hands with the CIA. The CIA had a program called Operation Chaos, where they would go in and they would infiltrate the movement, cause disruption, you know, like they did to Martin Luther King. Write letters to his wife, oh, you're going with this woman and that woman. You know, make up lies, infiltrate, cause disruption. They joined hands with the FBI. But on all four branches of the military, plus the United States Justice Department, marshals, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, Bureau of Indian Affairs, policemen, tribal police, and state troopers surrounded us for 71 days. That wounded Nate. They even armed the tribal police with special weapons called goon. They call themselves the Goon Squad, guardians of the Oglala Nation. They armed them against us. And for 71 days, we held them off. And they heard about the plight of the American Indian around the world. Things have changed a lot since then. Progressive tribal leadership today say they wouldn't have all the things they have had it not been for the American Indian movement. The reason why I'm saying these things is it's not about the mascot issue. It's a whole lot of things, other things involved here. This mascot issue, we've been involved in that from day one. We eliminated a lot of teams nationwide, colleges, universities, schools. A lot of them have stopped using those names and those mascots. They know how the psychological effect that it has on Indian people, particularly our children, to see that over and over and over, where they themselves start believing that's the way the Indian people were and are. Some places they even have savages, so-called savages, as mascots, cheerleaders, stuff like that, that wear that type of ridiculous paint on their face. Well, 9 years ago, the Minnesota Twins won the pennant. They were going to play in the World Series. And as they were waiting for the National League pennant race to be decided, I'll tell you how these things happen. I was at a birthday party. 41, they're waiting for the Atlanta Braves were playing the Pittsburgh Pirates. I went to a birthday party. I was at this little boy's house. He was 7 years old. Little Jacob Bellinger, nephew of mine. Fry bread was cooking and walleye and birthday cakes and balloons hanging all over the ceiling, pepper paper all over it. Little Jacob Bellinger, this is his day. This is the biggest day of the year for children that old. Little Jacob Bellinger come and got me, and he wanted me to go into the living room where the TV was blasting. I thought he got into one of his presents, you know, he wanted to show me a new Nintendo or something. And he took me into the living room, and here's all the men sitting around watching the National League pennant. And little Jacob Bellinger said, "Look, Uncle, look what they're doing to us." And I looked. And here I seen about 30,000 people in Fulton County Stadium with chicken feathers, red, white, and blue in their hair, paint all over their face. Some didn't have shirts on. Bodies all painted up. Can of beer in one hand and a tomahawk in the other, waving it up and down. And I asked Jacob, I said, "Jacob, does that bother you that much?" He says, "Yes, Uncle." He says, "Let's go. Let's go." Little Jay, this is his day, his big day, the birthday party. He thinks the game's already going on downtown in Hubert H. Humphrey Dome. He says, "Come on, Uncle." He thinks because I'm a leader of the American Indian movement, I'm like Superman or something. No, I can just go down and stop anything. Grabbed me by the hand. "Come on, Uncle." Going to leave his own birthday party to go down. He said, "Let's go down and put a stop to that." Jacob, if they're so fortunate to win the pennant, If they come to Minneapolis, Jacob, I said, me and you, we're going to go down and we're going to put a stop to it. I promise you that. Sure enough, they won. The next day they won the pennant. They were going to come to Minneapolis. I went to the school the next day at Heart of the Earth, and from kindergarten on, I interviewed every child, every class. I found out that every student in our school hated what they were doing to us. They said they don't even go to games because they hate to sit next to some drunk in the stand and hear him say, spear them, or massacre them effing Indians, massacre the Redskins, scalp the Vikings. They don't like to hear that, so they don't even go to games. And I started organizing. And within 1 week, it was just unbelievable, like a wildfire. Within 1 week, there was over 100 local and national every Indian organization in this country joined the National Congress of American Indians, National Indian Education Association, health agencies, all of your civil libertarians, human rights, civil rights organizations, unions, colleges, universities, every tribe in the nation started sending us endorsements to speak out against that type of racism, that type of ignorance that still prevails in America. Opening day of the World Series, the International Human Rights Commission were holding a major international conference in the Twin City area. They had been there for 2 or 3 days. You know, everything is cultural diversity today, so one day they were over in the Hispanic community eating tacos and listening to all the concerns of Hispanic people. Friday they were over in the black community eating soul food and listening to all the concerns and racism as it affects black people. One day they went to the gay and lesbian community and listened to their concerns. Guess where they were on the opening day of the World Series? They were at the American Indian Center, and guess who the keynote speaker was?
You.
Yeah. I let them eat and enjoy their meal for a little while, you know. And right in the middle of their meal, I told them I had to speak because it was getting close to the ball game time. We're going to have this big march, this big demo. And I got up and I asked them if they could remember when Jack Ken Cook, I named off all these owners of these baseball and football teams, were saying that they would never allow a black person on their team. And they said black people couldn't run fast enough to play basketball. They weren't tall enough. They couldn't jump high enough. Remember that? Us older people remember that. Jack Ken Cook of the Washington Redskins said he would never be forced to have a black person play on his team. That was a couple of years before that. Doug Edwards threw 4 touchdown passes. He said black people's skull was too thick. They could never be a quarterback. I asked the audience if they remember these people from all over the world. And then I told them about Charles Mann, making $5 million a year, that joined us, sent a letter of support to us. I told them about Franco Harris and Jim Brown, Kirby Puckett of the Minnesota Twins that supported our efforts. And I told them that if Martin Luther King was alive today, he would suspend this agenda and he would join the American Indians and he would march on the Hubert H. Humphrey Dome and put a stop to that type of ignorance, that type of racism. And of course, they were forced to suspend their agenda and joined us in that march. And we know we had 6,000 or 7,000 down there, but you know the police estimates were only about 3,500, which was pretty good for 1 week's work. Lo and behold, the Creator must have really got excited about what we were doing. 2.5 months later, he brought us the Super Bowl, right back to Minneapolis again. Brought the Washington Redskins there, and the Buffalo Bills to Minneapolis. We had it together this time. We had every organization, all of the churches, unions, civil rights, human rights, every people all over the world were sending us letters, endorsement, coming to town to join us. And we moved. Over 10,000 of us. Cold weather. Sometimes we were 15 abreast as we marched around and surrounded the stadium. And even the groundskeepers inside refused to put Redskins in the end zone. Even the groundskeepers inside. The Minnesota Twins, the same thing they did. They refused to put Braves where they stand and they warm up with their bat on the ball diamond. And that night I got a call that afternoon from Sportsline USA. You know, they interview high celebrities, high-profile sports celebrities. They don't interview Clyde Bellecourt. They said people are called in from all over the world. They want to know why you Indian people are marching, why you're demonstrating against the Atlanta Braves and Washington Redskins. We're honoring you, they said. We're honoring you. That's why we call ourselves Braves and Warriors and Redskins and that. We're honoring the Native American. They want you to come on Sportsline. We only want you for about 20 minutes. Got to answer some of these questions. Prime time television, right after the Super Bowl. 6:30 was on Sportsline USA being broadcast all over the world. And then people just packed into my office. We had them on conference hall. And I couldn't believe what I heard. I mean, I was looking for this Archie Bunker to call, you know, this redneck America to make that phone call, but it turned out different. The first caller to call was a black Baptist minister from Memphis. He said, I'm an old man now, he said, but I marched with Martin Luther King. I can remember when they said black people couldn't run fast enough to play football. They weren't big enough. They could never play basketball. He says it's hard to find a team today that has a non-black person on them. They're making millions and millions of dollars today. How come they're not standing up? And I told him about Charles Mann, Franco Harris, and Jim Brown, and Kirby Puckett, and those that were coming forward. I told him about Jesse Jackson, the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, the human rights and civil liberties people that were coming to town and support us. He was happy. People were calling from all over the United States. Every single one of them supported us. Housewives, senators, judges, legislators, from every walk of life, every religious persuasion called and supported us. And the guy that was interviewing me was getting a little irritated. I've been getting these calls all week, these racist calls, you know. Where are they? None of them came forward. I was getting irritated, upset myself. I wanted Archie Bunker to call. Toward the end of the program, we signed off, and he said, Mr. Bellecourt, he said, I know I'm going to get a lot of those calls after we hang up. He said, would you come back on maybe in a couple of weeks and answer some more of these questions? And I said, sure. I'd be happy to do that. And I could hear a phone ring in the background. You ever hear that? That's your home now? You just hate to pick it up because you know what's going to be on there? He said, I think I got another call. He said, Mr. Bellecourt, would you answer one more call? And I said, sure. He said, this man's calling from Atlanta, Georgia. Oh, I could just see my knuckles turn white. I was gripping that chair. Here he is, Archie Bunker himself, you know. One more call, and I turned on the phone. He identified himself. He says, I'm a white Methodist minister from Atlanta, Georgia. Boy, I was just gripping the chair, you know. And he wanted to qualify himself first, that he wasn't a racist. You know, me and my wife, we belong to the NAACP. I support the Urban League. My daughter plays the organ in the church. The other one sings in the choir. The great all-American family. And then he hit me. I think you Indian people got more important things to do than attack our great Atlanta baseball club. He said, we don't mean any harm. It's America's pastime. You guys got more important things to do than that. I said, Reverend, what are these more important things that you're talking about? I think you Indian people ought to do something about your alcoholism. I said, you know, Reverend, I said, we're one of the only living cultures in the world that had no trace of alcohol in it. Alcohol came over on that first boat. In fact, I said they brought alcohol, the Bible, and the devil all came on the first boat. And look at the devastating effect it has had on us Indian people. Yes, it is one of our #1 health hazards. But just a few years ago, I said we marched across America. We forced the government to pass the Indian Religious Freedom Act. We're going into the sacred lodge day, we're purifying ourselves. We're going back to the sun dance and the ghost dance and all the ceremony. Hundreds and thousands of our Indian people are sobering up today. And he cut me off. He didn't want to listen to that. It's another thing, he said, you ought to do something about this gambling and all these casinos you open up all over the country. You don't pay any taxes. He started whining like that. I said, you know, Reverend, where gambling comes from? He said, no. He said, you tell me. It came from the church. You started the bingo. You started the little casino nights, taking our food stamps and all of our money out of our community. And we tested our sovereignty. We built casino. We built bingo hall. They got bigger. Now we have casinos. Yes, you're right. We employ hundreds and thousands of people a day. In the state of Minnesota, where gambling started, Indian gaming started, we employ over 24,000 people in those casinos. 22,000 of them are non-Indians, making anywhere from $200,000 to $250,000 a year managing these casinos and taking our hotels and our golf courses for us, all the way down to blackjack dealers. We're making $14, $15 an hour. And I said, every one of them pay taxes. Oh, he got upset now. Now he's down to about, I don't want to insult 2 or 3-year-olds, but he's down to that level. And he's babbling now. He said, if you Indian people continue to march against our great Atlanta baseball club, he said, that's us white folks, that's good Christian folk, we're going to get out and we're going to start marching too. I said, wow. I said, what are you going to do, Reverend? He said, we're going to march against the California Angels. We're going to get the Angels to change their name because that's a Christian thing. We're going to get them to take that little halo off that A on their uniform. And before I could even respond, when we get through with them, we're going to march against the New Orleans Saints. We're going to get the Saints to change their name because that's a Christian thing. He said, will the American Indian movement come down and support us? Just like that, Mishomish Gitchimani-Tu, grandfather, gave me the answer. And here's what I told him. I said, Reverend, when they throw that rubber tomahawk away, take those chicken feathers off their hair. I told him the whole story about how Indians earn a feather and become a chief, a leader, who are allowed to wear that feather. They take those chicken feathers off their hair, throw away the can of beer, the tomahawk, quit slapping themselves in the mouth. I mean, what's wrong with the people that would slap themselves in the mouth and make a ridiculous sound they call a war whoop? And I said, when they quit doing the war chant in Fulton County Stadium and start waving crucifixes up and down, singing the Ave Maria, instead of having some cheap wahoo running around or a Lennewick running around the court, maybe they can have some mascot dressed up like the Pope, I told them. And every time there's a home run made, basket made, or a touchdown made, they can stand up, wave a crucifix up and down, sing the Ave Maria. This little fat guy dressed up like the Pope running around sprinkle holy water on all the drunks. I said, Reverend, when they do that to you, you call the American Indian movement and we'll be down there and we'll be with you. It was the shortest conversion in history. It was the shortest conversion in history. I said, Mr. Duckworth, now I understand what this struggle that you're going through is all about. I want you to send me all the information. I hope my parishioners are listening today because I'm going to go back to them on Sunday and I'm going to tell them word for word what you told me here tonight. And we are going to join you in this effort to eliminate. He said, John Wayne is dead. Little Black Sambo's gone, he told me. It's time for America to let it go. A month later, I was called by Ted Turner, asked a group of Indian people to come in and meet at Fulton County Stadium in Atlanta, Georgia, to discuss this issue of racism in sports and media. Took a lot of time, a lot of effort, hard. Raised a lot of money to go there. When we got there, they met us in Fulton County Stadium. Ted Turner wasn't even there. He had an emergency in someplace out in Montana, his ranch out there. He had to go, him and Jane Fonda, they kind of ducked out the meeting, took off. They didn't want to face us. But he had his manager, John Sherholtz, his whole managerial crew, his whole administrative organization was there, the whole apparatus of the Atlanta Braves. When they announced at us that we were going to only have 45 minutes after raising all this money and all this awareness and finally getting to talk to them, they were going to give us 45 minutes to make that trade. I found out they were all Jewish. So I thought, well, maybe I can open their eyes a little. So I talked about the Holocaust. I didn't even talk about Indians. For almost 35 minutes I talked about the Holocaust. Every time I turn the television on, that's all I hear is about the Holocaust. Every story, newspapers, movies being made every year, 2 or 3 movies a year about the Holocaust. And I told them we should never forget what happened to Jewish people because it could repeat itself again. Then I went on to talk about the Holocaust right here in America. 50 million Indian people erased from the face of the earth. You know, we're hearing a lot about ethnic cleansing today. You know where they learned that ethnic cleansing from? American government. There are tribes that are totally wiped out today. 50 million Indian people erased from the face of the earth since Columbus landed here. Whole tribe no longer exists today. And that's what I talked about to them. They were listening then. Then I talked about the Black Holocaust in America, what they've done to black people, and why they, as Jews of all people, should be supporting us in these efforts to eliminate this type of racism, this type of cultural genocide, ethnic cleansing that's going on yet here in America. We were there for over 4 hours, not 45 minutes, 4 hours. Right in the middle of the conversation, they were getting a little irritated. I was chairing the meeting, and they were getting a little irritated. Finally, John Sherwood stood up. He said, "All right, Mr. Bellecourt, tell me what you would do if you had all of Ted Turner's money, and you could buy the Atlanta Baseball Club. What would you change it to? What name would you give it?" Too. It didn't even come from me. It came from somewhere else. Had to shock him a little bit. And this is what I told him. I seen that it'd be more fitting to the culture here in Georgia area that you would call yourself the Atlanta Klansman. Instead of giving a rubber tomahawk and a chicken feather headdress to where maybe you can give everybody a sheet. They put the sheet on over their head and go in. And during the 7th inning stretch, I said you could have a mock gassing of a Jew or a hanging of black. And this guy turned every color you could think of. And I said, but wait a minute. If we had all of Ted Turner's money and we could buy this franchise today, we would never, ever dream about doing that to another race of human beings. And he started telling us how Ted Turner wanted to change the name. I really believe it's going to happen. We have a lawsuit that prevailed in Washington, D.C. We're going to be preparing the same type of lawsuit here in Champaign, in Cleveland, Ohio, Kansas City, wherever they continue to perpetuate that type of racism, which is leaving a mark on all of our children today. We're going to challenge them, and we're going to take them on. And they said that Ted Turner wanted to change the name. When he bought the Braves from Milwaukee, he wanted to change the name to the Atlanta Eagles. But the shareholders, they didn't want to give up this Indian thing. They're making money off it. They make money off the tomahawks and the chicken feathers and the headdress and the name and the logo itself. They said even if we changed the name, it would take us a couple of years to phase it out economically. I said, I can't buy that. Because I know that if you change the name tomorrow, the next run, the last run of those sweatshirts that sell for $60, $70 would be selling for $300 or $400. Ain't that right? They'd find a way to make money even if they change the name. So that doesn't hold here in Champaign either. They said, well, they're going to lose money here if they change the name. won't lose any money. They'll find a way to exploit it as they're exploiting it right now to make money off that change. So Chief Bellecourt, he's dying a slow death. And you can help him die. You right here in this room. You could put the final touches to him by contacting this president, contacting this board of trustees, and let them know that that type of racism cannot exist any longer. Let them know that they're not honoring us Indian people. No non-Indian person can be an Indian chief. It'll never happen. It can't happen. We're bringing this disgrace upon Indian people and upon yourself right here by allowing this to continue to happen. Little Black Sambo's gone. John Wayne is dead. He's dead. He's dead, America. He's gone. It's time for you to let him go. Let it go. Let him know that you're not going to stand for it any longer. Miigwech. Thank you. Questions? I'll try to answer the questions that anybody might have. Yes, yes, ma'am. The Pine Ridge Indian Reservation in South Dakota, where Wounded Knee exists yet today, they're still unsolved. There's never been a grand jury put together to investigate any of them. The United States, the FBI, the Justice Department have admitted that there are that many that exist, but they have done nothing. They have not lifted a finger to go in and do any type of investigation. So it kind of goes back to where it was at one time. There was a time in our history when it was perfectly legal to kill an Indian. In fact, you could collect a bounty for it. That's how scalping began. It began with a guy by the name of Governor Calvin out of Newfoundland. When it became too cumbersome to bury a body of an Indian person, he put out an executive order to prove that you kill an Indian and collect a bounty. You just had to bring in their skull. They said they were bringing them in by the wagon load and gunny sack and bushel baskets full. And some of the church ladies in the community said that was how gruesome that was, and that to prove that you kill an Indian, you'd have to just bring in a lock of the hair. And the wholesale slaughter of women and children started taking place. And by the way, that's where the word redskin goes back that far. They used to carry these little leather pouches, these bounty hunters. They'd carry these pouches outside their head. When they'd scalp it in it, they'd stick that scalp inside that pouch, and that skin would turn red from the blood. That's where the word redskin comes from. One of the origins of that is used today. But that's all scalping. Everybody believes that we as Indian people, because it's portrayed that way in the history books, that we're the ones that invented that. In my home state of Minnesota, we have one of our first governors was Henry Sibley. When the American Indian Movement formed, they had a book called Minnesota Star of the North. It was 20 years outdated when we formed. They didn't have pictures of Indian people, but they would draw pictures in the book. And they always portrayed Indian people like they'd have a farm woman back like this, pulling her hair back, and they'd be cutting her right here. And the baby'd be holding her leg, crying, and the poor farmer'd be laying out here in the field with an arrow in his back, and the farmer'd be burning down in the background. That's the way they depicted Indian people in the state of Minnesota. And we didn't have teeth then. We had fangs that hang way down here, and blood coming out, blood curdling fangs. That's how they taught our current teachers, our current principals, our current superintendent, our current school boards in the state of Minnesota. That's the only education they ever had. And that's why today, like in Menominee, Wisconsin, they voted, I think, 13-2 to eliminate the Menominee Indians. The community got so uptight, they didn't want to let this Indian thing go, you know. There's no Indian people even go to that school. So they turned around, and when the school board elections came about, they got rid of 8 members of the school board and put their own people back on the school board. And today they're trying to put the mascot and the name back on. And of course, I'm going to be speaking there on May 3rd, and I don't think it's ever going to happen. But there's this reverse racism that's coming out. So that's the only history that we have. And you know what? It was non-Indian students that got rid of that book. I spoke at a suburban school in Minneapolis and told them that the truth of what really happened during the local uprising. They said, what can we do to help? These are kids, 14, 15, 16 years old. And I jokingly said to them, you ought to all bring that book to school tomorrow and get it out of the library and build a bonfire and burn it up. And they did it. Almost got arrested over it, you know what I'm saying, and riot and all kinds of it. They burned that book up, and eventually within 2 years we had that book out of the whole curriculum in the state of Minnesota. The unfortunate thing is they haven't replaced it with the truth.
Yeah.
But they don't want it. They don't want their children, for some reason they don't want their children to know the truth. And that's all we're asking. We're not asking them to glorify us in any way. We just want America to know the truth. That's the success of our school, is teaching our children the truth. That's why they're graduating. Yes, ma'am.
Is there any place where we can get materials that actually do tell the truth?
You can contact the Heart of the Earth Survival School in Minneapolis, Minnesota. Area code 612-331-8862. Or you can call the State of Minnesota Indian Education Committee. There's a lot of curricula that's being developed across this country today, almost by every tribe, and particularly those that have casinos set in their backyard. They got money now. The system itself is never going to do that. The system itself is never going to do that. You know, it's our people had to do that themselves. I sat on a commission in Minneapolis in 1969, 70, and 71 where close to $2 million in federal money was expended to develop a new curricula. And we went out and interviewed elders, went to the wild rice camps, the sugar bush camps, the fish camps. We got all the old legends and stories about the Mandela Lodge, how it was erected and built, and ceremonies that were held seasonal. I haven't seen any of that yet today in the public school curricula, but it's in the Indian schools, the tribal controlled school on the residents. In Heart of the Earth school that I work with in Minneapolis, we have that, we use that.
I noticed, excuse me, but I noticed there's some web pages that are available and on the internet. There is a little bit of information there.
There's a lot of information now on the internet. We're on the internet too. The American Indian Movement, our whole history is on the internet. AmericanIndianMovement.com, organizations, and we're getting a little technical today, you know. Years ago. So, yes, sir.
The whole issue of replacement is really important. By that I mean replacing like these negative images of Indian culture that are so prevalent, like all across America, and that need to be retired. Something that's truthful, that actually reflected the honor and tradition, and kind of it would seem like even equal or greater tragedy would just be to have Indian consciousness fade from our society altogether. So I think it's also important that if and when Chief Leidenwick is retired, that you put something else in its place that, you know, keep the memory alive and not allow it to fade altogether. Because do you have any suggestions of what can be corrected?
I think you have to leave it up to the student bodies and the community to make those name changes and decide what they want their team called. But I've been in situations like in a place right outside of Minneapolis called Burnsville, and they call themselves the Burnsville Braves, and it's a suburban upper class community, like Littleton, Colorado. You know, the tragedy took place, and the school board before the Super Bowl took place, they took a vote and they said that they would never change their name. But after the Super Bowl and all the demonstration around, all the sports writers writing about it all over the world, being debated on all the television networks and newspapers, they decided to take another vote. This was only 5 months later. and they voted it out. I happened to be at that board meeting, the place was just packed. I mean, the cheerleaders and all the varsity teams, and everybody came there to support the continuation of that name, but the school board made their position very clearly. I mean, cheerleaders got up and just started screaming and crying and everything, you know, and they asked me and several other Indian leaders if we would stay over and counsel them, talk to them, you know. And we did that, and I sat around those groups for until almost midnight and convinced them that they would find a name that was more fitting to their team. And they've always had, almost every year, either baseball or soccer or basketball, or girls varsity. They always have a championship team out there. I said, you're going to still be champions. Nobody can take that away from you. And 2 months later, they came up with the name of the Burnsville Blaze. Burnsville Blaze, and they're state champions. They got over that, you know, and that kind of set an example where several other schools in the Twin City area in the state of Minnesota immediately made the change after that, and it was made public that happened. I don't know what it is, you know. See, it's not the name. There's nothing wrong with Braves and Warriors, and, you know, but Redskins, that's another story. There's nothing wrong with the name, it's the behavior that those names create. When people start coming dressed, you know, with war bonnets on, and a lot of which are worn and all that kind of stuff, you know. That's what the racism comes in. And that has a tremendous psychological effect on Indian children. I know my son, you know, I go to a lot of, I like to go to basketball games, football, baseball games, and I got a bunch of drunks, you know, about 6 innings, they've already had enough, you know. And if they're behind, they start saying, F them, stop them, F them, Viking, you know. They make statements like that. And my son said, come on, Dad, let's go home. You know, because he knows I'm going to confront him. Say something, you know. And he doesn't want that. When I do that, then the police come and the security, and usually every time they haul the drunks out of it. Or I get a better seat. They put me way down front there, you know. They know him, and so that's, I don't know why, you know. They don't want to make that change.
I was down in Calico, Oklahoma for an alternative spring break, this past spring break, and had the opportunity to speak to a group of elders from the Cherokee Nation. And I asked them about this issue of racism mascots and what their feeling was. And one of the elders got up and spoke and said, broke my heart, and said that it was an honor. And some of my classmates then took the opportunity to say, well, then, you know, we told you so. See, this isn't such a big issue. Luckily, I re-educated them. I showed them in whose honor and changed a lot of the viewpoints that some of them had. But what's the best way to handle that kind of situation?
Well, one of the only tribes in the nation that supported them was the Cherokee. It wasn't Western Cherokee, it was the Eastern Cherokee in Cherokee, North Carolina, because that's where they manufacture the tomahawks and the chicken feather war bonnets that they wear, so they're part of that. And that's, he probably was part of that particular band that was making money out of it. But I'm going to assure you that every tribe in the nation, National Congress, this lawsuit that just prevailed on the trademark of Redskin, the National Congress, American National Indian Education, National Indian Treaty Council, the American Indian Movement, every organization that covers Indian America was involved in that lawsuit. And they're going to be able to find people like that. We've always had our scouts. And that's my brother right here said in front. Every tribe we've had our scouts. They call them the Dakota people call them hang around the fort Indians. They're the ones that gave up. They made the treaties and give away their land. When lived by the fort to be protected. So we've always had that. We've always had our scouts. So there's always going to be one or two. Unfortunately, maybe he didn't have a television or something. Maybe he doesn't read the newspapers, you know. There might be a lot of reasons why he made a statement like that. Maybe they have a Tahlequah Indian team. There's nothing wrong with Indian people using that name because they are Indian, you know. And we have teams like Red Lake Warriors that's almost the state champions this year. We don't have no problem with the Warriors. They're Indians, you know. Yes, sir.
I'm an enrolled member of the Eastern Band of the Cherokee Nation.
He's the man.
bought off by murder money. And we never did make the tomahawks.
Yeah.
There was a Jewish man that came to our reservation. He set up a place where my mother-in-law worked. Made $20 a week in his sweatshop there. But he's since gone to China, started buying up all the tomahawks and head dishes that you see made by the Chinese.
You get him cheaper there.
Yeah, and then he stole this little label that Jonathan had approved for him, which was called Handmade by the Cherokee. So he made that little label, and that's what he hooks to every one of those tomahawks and things. Even though today, the only hands that touch those tomahawks are the few Indian people that work putting them in the boxes to ship them from Cherokee down. But, yeah,
Taiwan.
that's all been corrected. We have a new chief.
Yeah, he was the only person that actually spoke out against it. You know
Jonathan
that.
Ed, and we got rid of him.
Okay.
We've updated that Cherokee thing. There's some of us that had our religion, kept our religion, and continue today to practice our religion.
I know that. I know that. One of our greatest traditional family supporters from Oklahoma is the Drywater family. They went to the BIA, the Trail of Broken Treaty with us. They had tremendous support from Cherokee and Oklahoma. And from out there too. During the BIA takeover, they came from all over. The Lumbees, the Lumbees are, who they are. They're Cherokee too. They just give them a name because they moved them over by the Lumberton River, but they're the ones that came in. And of course, they were oppressed 200 years before us, you know. And they were angry, man. They're the ones that destroyed the BIA, not us. I couldn't blame them, and I couldn't stop them. I didn't want to stop them, you know. The only mistake that we made in 1972 when we occupied the BIA was that we didn't destroy it totally. For the oppression and the pain and the suffering and the theft. Everybody knows in the country today there's over close to $2.6 billion in Indian trust funds lost within the BI. They can't find it. All our money from our oil royalties and our timber and our resources, right now today, lost. And there's tribes, all the nations, join hands to file a lawsuit against the federal government to get that money restored. They can't find it. It's gone. Probably used in a Democratic campaign, Republican. Someone got a hold of it and they stole it. They still steal it today. They never stop. That's what.
This is just in response to someone's comment over there about honoring the memory of the Native Americans. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think that the university has a Native American Studies program or anything. And I think that if the university is so desperate to honor the memory of the Native Americans, that would be the most appropriate way of doing it.
You're right. They should have an Indian Studies program, and because of what they've done with the exploitation of Chief Lenowich, there ought to be hundreds of scholarships sent out to Indian people across this nation off the money, the exploitation, the money they make off of using it. Hey, I've seen that put on toilet paper here in Champaign. Now, how can they honor Indian people by putting this white Chief Lenowich on toilet paper? Everybody wipes their ass with them every day. How the hell is that honor Indian people? I mean, they gotta be sick. The administrators of this university gotta be sick, completely sick, to continue to hold on to and do what they're doing to Indian people through this so-called Chief Lenowich. Charlene Teeters came to Minneapolis and asked for our support, and we came down here. She was all alone on that issue when I first started. But when she showed me that toilet paper, that was it for me. I'd do anything that woman asked me to do. Do anything she asked me, just after I saw it. And I don't know how people here can buy toilet paper, like that, and not have a conscious of mind. You gotta be sick. Something wrong. Hey, time for Champaign to grow up, get a life. That's what.
I was curious about, Chief Lennon with the costumes. It's an authentic Indian they say. Originally it was made, and then I guess they had another one made, and it was supposed to be presented to the university or by a chief, one of the chiefs. What's your comment on that?
I've heard about that, and there's a lot of federal laws that have passed in just the last 10 years, to protect sacred sites, burial grounds, artifacts, etc. So I don't know where this war button is. Today, no doubt, they got it in a glass case, they got it locked up somewhere, but we'll find it. We'll get it back. So they better put it in a safe place. Yeah, like I said, we've got people that have been bought out. Poor people. Don't know how they got that or how they got that in their possessions. We heard it was from Chief Frank Fusco, which is one of the principal chiefs of the Oklahoma Nation, Pine Ridge, one of the men that actually called on the American Indians to do what we had to do in 1973. But we have never been able to trace that. We found out how they got it or if we were headed to do it at all. That's what they used for the contract, but they got it from Frank Fusco. That'd be something that the students want to do a study on that, a paper on that, they can find that all out for us. Yes, sir. Ken, I couldn't hear you.
What are you trying to do are you trying to rescind that at all?
Well, we have made public statements about it and publicly talked about in all our talks. That what he's saying is after the massacre at Wounded Knee in 1890, where the 7th Cavalry paraded through Denver, Colorado, and they actually had parts of women. And they took their breasts and made little pouches out of them. They had them on their uniforms and displayed a lot of those parts in a big so-called Victorious March. They call it the Battle of Wounded Knee, but it was really a massacre because there was nothing but women and children there. And they give them all Medal of Honors for that. Every one of them got a Medal of Honor. And we have made requests for that to be rescinded, but without a lot of public support, that would never happen. They just recently did that in Minneapolis. We're currently occupying a tract of land out by the Metropolitan Airport, where they're trying to build a light rail system from downtown Minneapolis to the Mall of America. And in order to do that, they got to go through some burial grounds, and we're occupying that. On the coldest day of the year, on December 22nd, they had the largest police raid in Minnesota history. They brought in over 600 policemen, police, Hennepin County sheriffs, and state troopers. They spent over $1 million. There's a guy by the name of Doug Grove wrote an article about that, exposing that. They spent $3,800 on donuts off the alone. They arrested 38 people that were locked down. It was like Earth First. I don't know if you know a little bit about Earth First, the environmental group. And they were locked down. They couldn't move. They had towels around their face. They drove up and they had 7 big 28-foot Ryder trucks. And they got a guy come in right before them, and he put this real fluorescent paint, 1, 2, 3, on 7 homes area where we were occupying. And then they brought in these trucks, and these stormtroopers jumped out. I mean, this is like 3 o'clock in the morning now. I'm talking about. They lit up the whole area. They come out of all black uniforms with hoods over their head. They had their badges covered, the numbers on the squad cars were all covered, and they launched tear gas into the house, and then they went in and they said when they put their sights on, they had little red laser beams were showing up on their bodies. They had laser beam M16s and the whole bit. And then when they pepper gassed them, and they got in there, took their towels out there and pepper gas. They even took some of them, they opened their eyes, they used swabs to put that pepper gas in their eyes. They swabbed their eyes. They were already locked down. They were handcuffed. Used bicycle locks and all that to lock themselves down to the trees and the homes, and they finally hauled them out. And then they brought in these big flatbed trucks, big bulldozers, big as this room here. And they bulldozed those houses, tipped them right over and smashed them up and loaded them in. Before daybreak, before the sun come up, it looked like nothing happened. everything was completely cleared, all the basements were filled, and the governor came along and congratulated all of them. The rest of them, the only charge they could get was trespassing. 2 weeks later, every single charge was thrown out of court. Now they're exposing over $1 million that they expended on. And the mayor of the city of Minneapolis gave the cops, the lieutenants that were involved in that, medals. Just like they did in Wounded Knee in 1890, they gave them medals for that raid that was done. Now they're going to the legislature and trying to get their law enforcement agencies, the state troopers, the Hennepin County, and the Minneapolis police, they're trying to get their budget replenished. Of course, where they're exposing what really happened and having problems getting that money together. It was the largest police raid in state history, and it was hardly ever covered. I mean, before the sun come up, it was all over. They had selected media, that the only ones they allowed in there. They had special badges on. Regular media that tried to get in there were also slapped down on the ground. Their films were taken out of their cameras and destroyed, and they were arrested. So, I mean, we're close to a police state here in America. Of course, I don't have to tell you folks, most of you know that, you know. That's what's going on. It was just unbelievable. I mean, I never seen so many policemen in my life at a little peaceful gathering, you know. No violence whatsoever, nothing, no weapons, nothing involved. There was nothing there that they could legally charge us with. We made sure of that. We even met with them for weeks in advance, because every day we were getting these rumors they're going to raid us. We met with the governor, met with the attorney general, met with the sheriff's department, met with the mayor's office. Told them, just let us know when you're coming. We have a peaceful lockdown. You want to arrest us? Go ahead. There's going to be no resistance. And that's the way they came in. Unbelievable. I mean, people in Minneapolis, I mean, there's still articles being written about, editorials come out almost every day. So it's no different, really, than what happened in 1890. Still going on. We had a treaty that prevailed. I don't know if you heard about it out here, but we had a treaty that was signed in 1837, which gave Indian people, never gave up the right to hunt, fish, gather wild rice, timber resources, deer, wild game, and all the land that they ceded in the state of Minnesota. And we went through quite a struggle, almost 22 years, and the Supreme Court just ruled here, but about 3 weeks old now, I get the papers nationwide, the Supreme Court ruled in our favor. And of all people to dissent and vote against us was Clarence Thomas. Clarence Thomas. It was only a 5-4 vote. And so he asked me what I thought about Clarence Thomas voting the way he did. And I said, well, that just makes him the second highest ranking Buffalo soldier in America. I told him Colin Powell was still #1. Buffalo soldiers, you know, what they did is after the Civil War, they created what's called the 1910th Cavalry. And that was and where I come from, that was our first meeting with black people. Because they were getting tired of getting their butts kicked in the non-Indian Caucasian Army. They used those people for their front line. So they're still using today. Vietnam and all over. They've done that. And they came in, and Indian people didn't have no word for them to know who they were or what they were. But they knew that they looked like, in my language, the Anishinaabe, we call them macadamias, like dark meat or a bear, like a bear. And the Lakota people, they referred to them as the buffalo soldier. And they feared them, you know. So that was the first effort after the Civil War to divide Indian and black people. And Clarence Thomas, of course, is still part of that. And Colin Powell is the head of the efforts that are taking place in America today to recruit young black children to become part of the Buffalo Soldier. It's bringing up all over the communities. Minneapolis is not, because we've been able to stop it there. But they're not telling these children the truth of how they used them to occupy the whole state of Kansas was settled by black slaves. Couldn't get the Indian people out of Kansas, so they brought black people in to do that for them. And So we've been able, the organization that we represent, we've been able to break down that, all those stereotypes and the image and the infighting and all that division that went on. Every single organization that I work with today, from the Legal Rights Center to all the way on down, we work hand in hand with the black community. Tremendous. Something goes on in black out there, man, right now. Same way it does. Some have it up there, there. We know that we have to stick together to make change. We do it there. Okay. They're picking up on that across the country today. That's what.
Let me say a few words about the international sort of context for indigenous.
What?
The international context. I know your brother's been to Chiapas. I suppose you might have gone as well. Just the idea that this isn't just here in the U.S. And I know that you might say a few words about your niece as well, if you feel like it.
We formed in 1974 during the Wounded Knee trials. The Wounded Knee trial lasted for 9.5 months. It was the longest trial in history of the government. And they had us on 24 counts of indictment. I was facing, at one time in my life, I was facing over close to 700 years in prison plus 2 life sentences for my participation in leadership at Wounded Knee. But in the end result, all those charges were thrown out. It was the government that was found guilty on illegal use of military force, illegal search and seizure, and several other charges. We knew that they would never listen to our treaty. We used our treaty as a defense. We were not occupying federal land. We were occupying land that belonged to us, our land that was being exploited. That was our defense. But they would never allow the treaty to be introduced during the trial, so we formulated what's called the International Indian Treaty Council. We met in Standing Rock Indian Reservation during the Wounded Knee trials, and 96 tribes responded from across America. We formed the International Indian Treaty Council, and we were given what's called non-government organizational status within the United Nations. We're the first organization in the history of the United Nations that have been given that type of status within that national body. And so that has brought us in direct contact with people in Central and South America. And we've worked very closely after Somoza was ran out of Nicaragua, the rebuilding of the country of Nicaragua, the Sandinista party to make sure they didn't establish a Bureau of Indian Affairs there, deal with the Rama, Suma, Poco River and Atlantic coast side. And we're intricately involved with the struggle in Chiapas and Guatemala and El Salvador and other Central American countries. Continuously show our solidarity and support with them. And we work with them whenever they come up here north of that. We call it an invisible border. We don't recognize that. When they come up here, we work very closely with them. There are millions of us. Just here in America, they say, well, there's 200 million or 2 million Indian people. And we know that's differently because a lot of them are not recognized, federally recognized. We talk about people that have been terminated, especially out here in the East. It was just in recent years with the Pequot in Connecticut and the Mohican, and then we're all given back their federal recognition. That big casino, multi-million-dollar, billion-dollar casino sitting in their backyard today. But when you go out throughout Central America and South America and Hawaii and all those countries, there's millions of us. And of course, they're doing everything that they can possibly do to keep us separated. But through the International Treaty Council, we're all coming back together with them. They're upset about it, they're worried about it.
Anybody have any more questions? Yeah, just one more.
One more question.
So you mentioned alcoholism and you mentioned in passing some ways that have been developed to overcome alcoholism. And I was
Alcoholics Anonymous, you know, the only way people sober up at Alcoholics Anonymous is by developing a spiritual base. It's always been a stumbling block for a lot of Indian people because most of us aren't Christians, you know. We were forced to go to church when we were kids, and because of that, we don't go to church, a lot of us today. And so in order, if you don't have a spiritual base, you can't deal with these kinds of problems. So we go into the sweat lodges today where I come from. I've been sundancing for 27 years. And we have hundreds and thousands of Indian people that are going to the sundances all over America, not just Minnesota, all the way up into Canada, all the way down to south, down to Arizona, all over. Hundreds and thousands of Indian people are coming together regularly today. We're going through these purification ceremonies. We're dealing with the alcohol, you know, drugs, and all that. And just virtually hundreds and thousands of our people are sobering up today, and realizing that that was the first form of chemical warfare used here in America, is alcohol. The second form of chemical warfare was government quantity, surplus food, commodities. You know, they started to get into the cheeses and the powdered milk and the canned chicken, canned pork. And in my reservation, we had not one single case of diabetes in 1946. So what did they do? They brought government staples, food commodities to us. We never had fried bread prior to that. We started eating everything with white fried bread, white salt, white sugar, canned pork, canned chicken. Today, over 50% of our people in my tribe, my nation, are dying from diabetes today. So they know exactly what they're doing, and we're trying to combat. We have a war going on about diabetes today. We've been in it for about 6 years. We started community gardens where I come from. We tested the northern part of the state, and the first thing they told us, well, you can't make farmers out of Indians. Hey, where do you think all their food came from? Yeah. From Mars or somewhere? I told them, we started with 17 little family farms. Next year we had 200 farms. The third year is just unbelievable. There's over 1,400 community gardens and farms going. Last year there was over 4,000. It's spread into 4 states now, where people are going back to the organic gardening and putting together their own food, because the only way you can cure a lot of these diseases that people have today is by eating good food and good exercise. Good food and good exercise, and our people of all people know that. So that was the first, that was the second form of chemical warfare. You go down in southwest, down along the Arizona there, Salt River and Salt River Drive, Pima Indian down there, up to 80% of the people down there have diabetes today. 80%. The Pima Indian at one time used to be able to run 65 miles a day. They'd be runners, they would carry messages from one tribe to the next. Never weighed more than 120, 125, 130 pounds. It's different today. The government knows exactly what they're doing. And we're combating that all over the country. And of course, there's this casino industry. There's over 300 casinos in America today. And as you know, the people in Nevada and Las Vegas and up in New Jersey on the boardwalk, and they're trying everything to stop this kind of development, because Indian people are starting to deal with all those issues that have affected them for hundreds of years, and they're trying everything they can possibly do to shut that down, stop that. They don't want Indian people to have money or make money. But we all know in America that's power. That's power. The only way you can hurt non-Indian person, you can hit them in the head, you do anything you want them, but you hit them right here, that's when it hurts. I don't think you seem to understand. And we know that. So we're becoming more sustainable. We're developing our own garden. We have our own health programs, we have our own hospital, we have our own schools, colleges, our own fire department. We're developing our own judicial process, our own police department. It's working. I talked to a friend of mine, Michael Haney, that's been here several times. Confronted Janet Reno yesterday in Minneapolis, Minnesota. And he asked her why she doesn't call a national summit with Indian people to deal with the development of violence in Indian youth gangs that's spreading throughout America today. And she said, she started telling us how she's already started that, developing that. What she found out, she said, that white America has a lot to learn from Indian people. And she cited the sentencing circles that are going on up in Alaska, on the Mille Lacs Indian Reservation, and down in the Southwest, where when a young person has done something wrong, they're not innocent until they're proven guilty. They're guilty. They admit to their guilt, and they're turned over to the Indian community. And they form what they call a sentencing circle. And the community decides what the punishment should be. And when the reparations are done, that person has to make some type of gift. They have a big feast, maybe 6 months later, a year later. They bring those opposing families and the ones that have been hurt together, and that boy or girl or adult person that committed that crime, they give to that victim. And they're keeping the whole community and family together. And she told the public in Minneapolis yesterday, after talking about the tragedy in Littleton and all the things that are bad that's happening in this country, that America has a lot to learn from Indian people, and she's going to be holding this summit to find out how she can expand on those efforts that are taking place. So alcohol had a devastating, still has today, has a grip because of the unemployment and the poverty and the lack of opportunity to get a good job and good training to take care of our families. A lot of our people end up in alcohol. I was one of them. Controlled my life, alcohol and drugs. I gave it all up 26 years ago. Gave up everything. It took me a long time to get rid of the marijuana, but I've been off it for 14 years. Off the cocaine and everything. Got rid of it. Because I knew what it was doing, how it affected. I spent 16 years of my life since I was 11 years old in correctional institutions, prisons. And I figure if anyone can get out from under that and do some of the things that, people in the movement are all like that. We all come from that kind of background. Every one of them are free today. Every one of them are sober today. Every one of them are contributing to the community today. And we figured if we could do it inside prison, organize prisoners to do something about it, because that's where the movement really started. It started in prison, working in prison to help one another. So if we can be successful in doing that in prison, why can't we do it out in the streets? So we brought that idea of self-determination right out of the prison, right out of solitary confinement to the streets today to work with our young people. And I'm one of those kind of guys that looks for those kind of people to employ. Most people don't want to hire somebody because they got a record, they've been in jail. If I can find somebody that's got a record and sobered up and ain't doing that dope or alcohol, man, send me, I'll hire them right now. Because they know what they went through. They put their heart in trying to help other people from going through the same thing. Being isolated, going through all that pain and all that suffering, being separated from home, family, and community. We don't want to see that happen to our young people. That's why we're so committed. That's why I say, I don't care what they do. They can shoot me right now and get rid of me, get rid of Dennis Bank, get rid of all the leadership. Just like the civil rights movement, it will continue. It's a spiritual rebirth. There's no way that can be stopped.
Before everybody gets out of here. The first thing is for everyone who's here, if you could please stop by the table outside and grab one of these green cards with the resolution that was passed today by the People's Board of Conscience. What you should do is either all you need to do is write your address on the back and drop it in campus mail, and please sign it, or even better, take it and sign it and deliver it directly to President Stuckel's office, and we will get the message across. The second thing is a reminder on the upcoming events. Saturday night from 6:30 to 9 p.m. here in Weisgarver Lounge, there is the Jose Solis Jordan benefit. Please come and listen to Jose Lopez speak. He's an excellent speaker. And on May 22nd, again here in Weisgarver Lounge, the counter recruitment fair from 2 to 5 p.m. And again, check the literature out and t-shirts, buttons outside on the table. And thanks everybody again for coming. Another big hand for Clyde.
4 minutes left.